Welcome back to a very special edition of Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. My name is Josh Hasten, coming to you remote along with JNS CEO Alex Traiman, who is in Washington, D.C., covering the visit of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to the capital of the United States of America, visiting with President Donald Trump just 2 weeks after the inauguration of the president. He is the first foreign leader to make an official state visit to the White House. Alex just arrived several hours ago in D.C. Alex, what can you tell us so far? And we'll get into all the details of what to expect, what we can expect from Netanyahu's trip to Washington.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot to unwrap over here. The prime minister is yet to touch down. I believe that they're going to be touching down any moment. Expected to be here at the press, most of the press delegation arriving here maybe only within the hour. So this is really the very beginning of the visit for Netanyahu. Very, very high stakes. We're in the middle of a war that seems to be screeching towards a halt in Gaza with a ceasefire deal and the release of some of the remaining hostages in place. A bit of uncertainty about what's going to be after the 6 weeks, if we even make it to the 6 weeks, even if we get back the first group of all of the hostages that's supposed to be released in this phase one. We are in a ceasefire in Lebanon that was supposed to draw the IDF down out of southern Lebanon over a period of 60 days. That's already been extended now, a period of time. Not clear if Israel's going to resume fighting in southern Lebanon. And of course, the Iranian threat still looming very large. So Netanyahu here to try to get on the same page as Donald Trump. The two of these leaders worked very well together in their first term when Trump was the 45th president of the United States. And Netanyahu is hoping that now with the stakes even much higher as the 47th president, that they can come to some major understandings in many areas, which we will soon break down for you here on Jerusalem Minute.
If people didn't check out your article, they certainly should on jns.org, what Netanyahu and Trump hope to achieve together in Washington. The first point that you make is that Netanyahu's visit signals the importance and strength of the U.S.-Israel relationship, which took a beating under the Biden administration. I think it was months, if not longer, that President Biden took to invite Netanyahu to meet with him at the White House. And here you have literally 2 weeks and already Netanyahu flying to D.C. Talk about the significance of that, the fact that it only took such a short time before the prime minister got the invite.
Well, as you mentioned, I mean, it took a long time under the Biden administration. It wasn't until a meeting between Netanyahu and Biden at the UN General Assembly in September of 2023, which was already, more than 2 years into Biden's term in office, that he even extended a verbal invitation to Netanyahu to come to the White House. Now, of course, within about 3 weeks of that time, Israel was in war. It was literally just before October 7th. And then it wasn't until July of 2024 that Netanyahu actually came to the White House. And I remember writing my preview column for that trip as I was coming to Washington to cover it. And from the time I got on the plane till the time I got off the plane, President Biden had announced his withdrawal from the 2024 election race. So you see that even when Netanyahu came to meet Biden here in July of 2024, he was already no longer going to be the candidate. There was also a meeting with Kamala Harris, and also Netanyahu flew down to Mar-a-Lago to meet with Trump. So you could see that under Biden, they really tried to put distance or daylight between the U.S. and the Israeli administrations, which proved to be very difficult. In the beginning of the war, of course, Biden did come over to Israel. First president to come over to the state of Israel during wartime. I believe he came within the first 3 weeks of the war. And that was a sign of closeness between the two countries. But as that war continued to progress, we saw that the distance, the daylight, the public daylight between Netanyahu and the Biden administration expanded. So now here by Trump issuing this invitation literally to come to the office, the White House, rather, barely 2 weeks after his inauguration, it demonstrates how quickly Trump wants to see things moving here with the Middle East. He's not wasting any time, not on his domestic agenda, not on his diplomatic agenda, but also inviting Netanyahu to be first really demonstrates, like you said, the strength of the U.S.-Israel alliance to both countries, not just Israel, but also to the United States. And by having Netanyahu be the first one, I think it's a show of respect for Netanyahu that the Biden administration didn't give. One other small point, which I would note on that, is that when Netanyahu did come to address the joint sessions of Congress and to have his meetings at the White House, he was not invited by Biden to stay in the Blair House, which is the guest house of the White House. And Netanyahu and his delegation stayed at the Watergate Hotel. Now, Trump issuing the first invitation, it's going to be a working meeting, and Netanyahu staying at the Blair House, given the honor that one of the world's longest tenured leaders of a democracy should be afforded.
Nuance is certainly important, so let's not downplay that. But in terms of the actual issues, and I want to break them down one by one. The first one, of course, in terms of their discussions, certainly the ceasefire in Gaza. We are still in phase one of that ceasefire. The discussions on phase two are supposed to start here shortly on day 16 of the first phase, which is a 42 phase in which 33 Israeli hostages, 18 already released, the remainder to be released. Those who, please God, and the majority will be alive, and those who unfortunately may not be alive are supposed to be released before we get to that phase two. But the talks are already supposed to start taking place. Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff was already in Israel this week, and he's supposed to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu, I believe, on Monday before the meeting with President Trump on Tuesday. You said in your column the following. You said it is strongly believed that Netanyahu will impress upon Trump the need to resume fighting in Gaza. So if that is the case, how is that the case? Isn't really my question. If we're talking about a ceasefire on one hand, okay, how will Netanyahu be able to impress the fact that Israel needs to go back to war on the other when Trump says he is a president that wants peace? He's a president that wants to end wars, not start wars or continue wars. You sort of have a conflict there of interests with Trump saying he wants to end wars and Netanyahu, as you suggested here, saying that Israel must continue the war against Hamas. And Netanyahu actually made similar comments several days ago, saying, as we were getting hostages back, Israel must continue and achieve those three goals: bringing back the hostages, defeating Hamas, and ensuring that Gaza no longer is a threat to the state of Israel. How do those all interact with each other?
Yeah, Netanyahu is in a tough spot right now. Let's be clear about it, that this war started in large part because of the Biden administration's posture towards the Middle East that supported Iran, that really tried to bring the push toward a two-state solution back to the forefront, that tried to slow the momentum on the Abraham Accords normalization agreements. And Trump will be the president that sees this war come to an end. But the question is, how does this war come to an end? Does it come to an end because Trump said stop fighting and everybody just freezes where they are and then the war is over? Or does this war end with a swift Israeli victory? Now, under the Biden administration, there were many red lights that were put up and yellow lights that were put up in front of the IDF, not allowing it to pursue the war as quickly as they would have wanted to do that. So I think that Netanyahu is going to come and he's going to explain to Trump exactly what needs to be done and how quickly it can be done in order to get this war done fast. Now, as you note, though, we are in phase one of what's supposed to be a three-phase ceasefire agreement. Phase one in and of itself is a temporary 6 weeks agreement that is supposed to bring back 33 hostages, of which, according to many reports, about 26 of the 33 are alive. That still leaves something like 75 of the, if my math is right, of the 98 hostages that are still missing. Now, we don't know how many of those are alive. In phase two, you're supposed to start to get back the males who are under the age of 50 and the male soldiers. And phase three, then you would get back all of the bodies. Phase two is supposed to be already a permanent ceasefire. But Netanyahu has an issue. Number one is that you can see from the ceremonies that Hamas is putting on as it's releasing the hostages that it's giving back, that Hamas is still in power in the Gaza Strip. You could see that they still have military capacity, and they're certainly still governing in the Strip. They are hijacking the humanitarian aid that's pouring into the Strip now, and distributing it, in some cases selling it at way beyond market value, and actually making a killing off of that. So as long as Hamas is still in power, this war is not over. So I think what Netanyahu is going to stress that what steps need to be taken to remove Hamas from power in the Gaza Strip.
I want to talk about the day after and what will happen in terms of Hamas and who's going to take control. But you made it very clear in your article that you view this deal, as do many, many Israelis, as an immoral deal. You're talking about, of course, everyone is happy to see the hostages returned, and there's no comparison between the morality of the state of Israel and the people of Israel and how we value each and every life, bringing back these 33, as opposed to Hamas, who values death and reveres death. But at the end of the day, you're talking about 1,900, some of the most murderous terrorists being released back into society, and a moral deal, which was in fact brokered by Steve Witkoff, President Trump, who wanted to see a deal done. So how can those things coexist? On one hand, an immoral deal, but yet on the other hand, the fact that we have a great friend who just invited the prime minister to Washington very, very shortly after his inauguration. And after that, I want to talk about the day after.
Sure. I mean, if you judge the deal on its own merits and judge it in a vacuum, as we said, it's unjust, it's imbalanced, and quite frankly, it's immoral, because we know that some percentage of these terrorists that are released from jail are going to go back and commit further acts of terror, and that people will die because terrorists are being released. Some of these terrorists are being released back in Judea and Samaria, not just into Gaza. Some of them are being exiled abroad, but Yahya Sinwar was one of the terrorists released in the Gilad Shalit deal, which saw 1,000 terrorists released for a single Israeli hostage. So here you have a similarly stunted deal. Okay, maybe there's a few more hostages, but you're talking 33 hostages for 1,900 terrorists. Many of them serving life sentences in Israeli prison, and you're not even getting back all the hostages. So you still have a hostage crisis even after this is over. Okay, and that's the reason why some of Netanyahu's strongest right-wing coalition members railed against this deal, and Itamar Ben-Gvir resigned with two other members of Netanyahu's cabinet over this deal, saying this is not a deal that he could support. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich is also very opposed to the deal, but he opted to remain in the coalition for the time being on a promise from Netanyahu that this is a temporary ceasefire deal and it doesn't mean the end of the war. So if Trump is good at making deals, Trump doesn't just want to make a deal because I'll take any deal I can get whenever I can get it, no matter what the terms. Trump is he wrote the book, The Art of the Deal. He wants a good deal. And Steve Witkoff is also, he's a New York real estate, mogul. He also knows about good deals, and he must know that this is not a good deal. And I do think that the day after does play in here. Trump has said, and other members of Trump's administration have said that Hamas will not govern the Strip on the day after.
Yeah, Rubio said it this week also.
Right. And we'll talk about this in a minute. I'm not going to get into that so much right now, but the idea of Gazans may be able to flee the Gaza Strip and to go towards Egypt. And even we're seeing now reports of tanks in Egypt moving towards the Gaza border. We could talk about that after. If we're going to get to a situation where Hamas is going to be removed, maybe Gazan citizens are going to get moved out of Gaza, that creates a tremendous sense of urgency to get the hostages out now for a couple of reasons. Number one is, if Hamas is not in charge, they're not going to release the hostages. The party that is in charge is the one that knows where the hostages are. And so you want to give them the feeling that they're getting something that they want in order to get the hostages out. Number two, if Gazans are going to get to flow through the Egyptian border, hostages could be smuggled out just as well. So there's a tremendous sense of urgency to get the hostages out as soon as possible, not to mention that the health of many of these hostages is not good. I mean, the health of the ones that we've gotten back so far seem to be relatively stable, but it's believed that the hostages that came back first are the ones that are the most healthy. And so for some of these hostages, any more days, any more weeks in captivity could be a death sentence. So there's a lot of reasons to get the hostages out immediately. And if that's the case, then okay, you take whatever deal you can get, even if it's a bad deal, even if it's a lopsided deal. Now, remember that since this war started, Israel's killed about 18,000 terrorists. And if Hamas is going to be taken out on the, on the flip side of this, so this deal, which in a vacuum looks like a horrible deal, will be mitigated somewhat by what's happened before this deal was signed, and we'll see if it will be mitigated by what happens after this deal is finished.
So getting to the point of the day after. So the options: Hamas, which is basically a non-starter in terms of where we're concerned in Israel. Another option that's been floated, at least by the Biden administration, was the Palestinian Authority, which is really two sides of the same coin as Hamas. We know that. Israel also has floated the idea of perhaps moderate Arab nations, as you point out in your article, including United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia playing a role here. Others have called for Israel to resettle, to undo the unjust, which took place back in 2005, pulling all Israeli civilians out of Gaza in 2005, perhaps reestablishing the communities of Gush Katif and Gaza, all those ideas being floated. And at the same time, as you mentioned, Trump is doubling down on his idea of moving those people out of Gaza. We've seen the images of Gazans going back to what were their homes in the north, realizing there's nothing left for them there, moving back to the south, seeing that their homes no longer exist anymore. Different reports saying maybe it would take as much as 10 years, 15 years, even 20 years to rebuild Gaza. Trump saying Egypt and Jordan should be taking in these people. Just a statement over the weekend, the Arab foreign ministers rejecting the transfer of Arabs from Gaza under any circumstances or any justifications. In other words, Egypt, Jordan saying under no circumstances will they take in any Arabs from Gaza into their country. So there's a lot of issues I just talked about here. So let's break them down one by one. Number one, the day after. And number two, Trump doubling down on what he's saying. Essentially, perhaps, I don't know, even threatening. Maybe he'll withhold some sort of aid to Jordan and to Egypt if they don't step up to the plate and say that they're going to help with the situation in Gaza and take in these people.
Well, let's deal with the second issue first, the issue of Gazans being able to leave the Gaza Strip. Okay, first of all, it was a degradation, a removal of their basic humanitarian right to be able to flee a war zone. Right, anybody in the time of war should be able to flee. Obviously, Israel's not going to let Gazans come into their country because Gazans attacked Israel on October 7th. Okay, that would be a death sentence for Israelis to bring Arab terrorists into the country. That was never going to happen. But Gaza has a 9-mile wide border with Egypt to the south of Gaza and the south of Israel. And they refused from day one to allow Gazans to flee the war zone. And basically, Israel had to deal with that. They had to figure out how to move civilians out of harm's way. They had to come up with totally new ways of carrying out warfare. And quite frankly, a lot more Gazans probably died because Gazans were not able to get out of harm's way. And perhaps it was designed like that. The calls were made as such in order to keep the civilians in harm's way because, as the prime minister says, every civilian killed in Gaza is a tragedy. But for Hamas, every civilian killed is a strategy. Now Trump's coming in and he's just using common sense. Look around at what's happened in Gaza. The most of Gaza is in much devastation right now. There are some parts that haven't been hit so hard, but there are some parts that have been almost completely flattened. And the reason that's the case is because Hamas decided to embed itself among the civilian population. There was weapons, there were tunnels in almost every house in Gaza Strip. I've been told this by so many soldiers that have been in Gaza. I just asked them off the record many times, how many houses are you finding weapons in, finding tunnels in? The answer all the time is practically every single one. And that's the reason why Israel went into every single house and, in fact, demolished many of the houses, whichever houses were being used in order to advance terror against Israel, to carry out the war against the IDF. They were destroyed. And so now you have not much of Gaza left. And so for the first time, Trump's coming, Witkoff was just there last week and saying with some common sense, look, this place is a mess. It's a complete devastation. And as you said, it's going to take years to rebuild. So what are we going to do with these people? Are we just going to have them sitting there in a humanitarian crisis, or can, like in any other refugee situation in the world, in any other place of war, can the Gazans get to leave? And so while Egypt has said they won't take any, and Jordan has said they won't take anybody, Trump continues to double down on these statements. And it's a big surprise. And Trump said, we give a lot of aid to Egypt, we give a lot of aid to Jordan, and they'll take them. So Trump is insisting on this. And it's very interesting, by the way, that that King Abdullah of Jordan is the second world leader White House, and he's being invited. He'll come here a week later on February 11th. Right. Who knows what that meeting is going to look like? What kind of package the United States might offer Jordan in order to take Gazan refugees. Now, you'll note that even just last week, it was announced that foreign aid to all countries from the United States was going to be stopped, except for two countries. One, Israel, okay, which I think demonstrates, Israel's situation right now and the importance between the U.S.-Israel relationship, as we discussed before, but to Egypt, because Trump, I think, wants Egypt to start taking in Gazan refugees. And as I mentioned before, there's reports now, and I just saw early videos of this. We still need to confirm exactly what's happening, but it seems like there are Egyptian tanks and Egyptian troops moving towards the Gaza border. Now, by the way, that in itself is a violation of the peace agreement signed between Israel and Egypt. The Sinai is supposed to be a demilitarized zone. So one of two things is happening. Either Israel is going to be at war with Egypt, or Egypt is preparing to escort Gazans south of the Gazan border into Egypt. And we don't know what's going to happen with them after that. So these are the types of things which I think are going to have to become clearer, either in the press conference on Tuesday between Netanyahu and Trump, or in the weeks to follow. And then once that happens, and we don't know what that's going to look like, but if Gazans leave or if Gazans stay, that makes a big difference on what the day after looks like and how fast the day after begins to take place. Are Gazans going to be there? And if the Gazans are going to be in Gaza, so who governs them? It's not going to be the Hamas. There are people saying it should be the Palestinian Authority. Israel saying it should not be the Palestinian Authority. As you mentioned, that's two sides of the same coin with Hamas. Or will Israel come in? Now, if Gazans leave, well, then you don't have this problem in the meanwhiles of who's governing the strip. And then you can start to make master plans for what does Gaza look like? How does it get rebuilt? And then a decision as to whether Gazans will be able to resettle there or not. There's a lot of question marks here. And this war has been progressing without Netanyahu stating very clearly necessarily what the day after looks like, what the goals are. And maybe now with Trump in office, all of this starts to come into focus.
Imagine that. Imagine Israel has to go to war on an eighth front. If 7 wasn't enough, an eighth front with Egypt, that's number one. And number two, the president has said, President Trump has talked about prime real estate. I'm referring to Gaza, beachfront property. So nothing's out of the realm in terms of what Gaza could be, but we're talking about 10, 15, or 20 years in the future. At the same time,
Gaza's so beautiful. The beachfront there is so beautiful.
Gush Katif was paradise.
Gaza should look like Tel Aviv, but
it's not what Hamas wants.
But it's and here you have on the one hand you have people talking about Gaza being an open air prison before the war, and now that Israel's destroyed the open air prison, now you have Gazans talking about how it was a paradise.
Yeah,
so which one is?
Yeah, absolutely. The hypocrisy there.
It's a lot better in the next 10 to 15 years than it looks now.
Another issue, which I'm sure is going to come up in the meetings between Netanyahu and Trump, is the situation in Lebanon. We have this precarious ceasefire in the north here. We had the 60-day period, which expired on January the 27th. Israel asking for an extension, another 30 days due to the nearly daily violations, as you point out in your column here, of the ceasefire by Hezbollah. Just over the last 48 hours, additional violations by Hezbollah. Israel forced to strike along the Lebanese-Syrian border at Hezbollah terror targets, reported by JNS and other sources in the media. So another issue there, which is going to have to come up in those talks between the prime minister and President Trump.
When Netanyahu declared the ceasefire in southern Lebanon, it was amidst very heavy rocket and missile attacks and shelling across the border on both sides. I mean, the Israeli home front was getting pummeled. The Iron Dome and the other missile systems not doing a perfect job of stopping Hezbollah missiles from reaching Israeli territory. People were getting killed. Buildings were getting destroyed. At the same time, Israel in this war really running out of some critical munitions that are needed to keep up the fighting. You had IDF troops you had been fighting for as many as 10 months, with very little interaction with their families. So Netanyahu opted at the time to cut a deal which called for a 60-day drawdown of Israeli troops from southern Lebanon in exchange for a ceasefire. And the period of time, that 60-day period, was not chosen by accident. It was 60-day period, which would make the end of that, which it just came due last week, being after President Trump was in office. And so Netanyahu convinced his cabinet members and the Israeli public that this too was a temporary ceasefire. At the time, that allowed even the Biden administration to agree to release some weaponry that Israel needed. So Netanyahu thought at the time, get weapons, restock the supply chain, get some rest for the soldiers. I think by and large, Israelis have been happy with the results of the ceasefire because of the quiet that it's brought. But as you mentioned, there are numerous violations of the ceasefire deal, and we see that Hezbollah will come down closer to the border. The Lebanese army is supposed to be the guarantor that Hezbollah doesn't come down near Israel. And the Lebanese army is a very weak army, and there's no reason to believe that the Lebanese army is not fully infiltrated by Hezbollah. So this is definitely going to be an issue that comes back onto the table, and we don't know whether full war is going to resume or whether Netanyahu will say, we can live with the situation, or let's maintain some degree of this ceasefire, but we'll maintain some positions inside southern Lebanon. And what kind of aid package Trump might give towards the Lebanese people, for rebuilding, in exchange. So there's a lot of moving parts here. Nobody knows how any of these fronts are going to resolve themselves, and that's why this is going to be a working meeting. This isn't going to be some ceremonial meeting, even though there is ceremony and there's a lot of symbolism in the ceremony itself. But this is a working meeting to figure out what's going to happen on these two fronts, Gaza and Lebanon, and we haven't even touched on the major front, which is Iran yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I just mentioned briefly the Houthis, of course, which the Trump administration on day one, I believe, designated the Houthis as a international terrorist organization, which the Biden administration took off that list. So you have the Houthis as well. And the most important issue, let's get to it, is Iran. How much of Trump, but even before he was president, and Netanyahu said that they were completely in line when it came to step by step, I think, or was the terminology used in terms of the threat of Iran, and they were on the same page in terms of their approach. And Iran absolutely cannot go nuclear. This is something the Prime Minister Netanyahu has been saying now for over 20 years, I believe. Will the United States get on board and actually partake in any sort of attack on the Iranian nuclear facilities? Will they greenlight Israel to take part in that? How much of a role will the U.S. administration play in a potential Iranian attack? I think on last week's program, we talked about this as well. We started to touch on this issue. Perhaps even a negotiation with the Iranians could be on the table. So I think this will also be a major issue and a major topic, I should say, during the negotiations, during the discussions this Tuesday.
Yeah, I don't think that Netanyahu is going to try to surprise Trump with an attack on Iran without them being on the same page. I do believe that Netanyahu wants to work together with Trump. And the question is, what's Trump's priority here? Does he want to try to use economic levers and max sanctions, crippling sanctions, to try to bankrupt the regime and force some kind of regime change? Is he going to put pressure, and support the Iranian citizens in taking back their government from the mullahs of the Islamic Republic, and or is Trump going to support some kind of strike on the underground nuclear facilities, which are all over Iran? And let's face it, this is the last minute. I know that Netanyahu has been saying it for years. He went to the UN already years ago, and with a picture of a bomb and a red line, and he says, Iran is ready to cross the red line. Every single red line's been crossed. Okay, it's now the question of, is Iran going to use the nuclear weapon to try to wipe Israel off the face of the earth? Okay, and we see what they've been able to do to attack Israel before they crossed the nuclear threshold. They've already attacked Israel with over 300 ballistic missiles, over 100 cruise missiles, and drones. They've been funding Hezbollah. They've been funding Hamas. They've been funding the Houthis. They've been funding other terror groups inside Syria and Iraq. Some of those groups have not only attacked Israel, which is Israel's been hit from 7 different countries, but they've also attacked American installations inside Iraq, inside in the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, near the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea. So it's now or never. The decision has to be taken. Is Israel going to take out Iran and their nuclear sites? And we're talking about, when we say taking out Iran, we don't mean like attacking all the civilians. We mean taking out the nuclear sites and trying to affect some kind of regime change. Can Israel do it by itself? I mean, this has been one of the major questions. Does Israel have what it needs? Does Israel have a list of things that it needs that it's going to be asking Trump to provide, which includes bunker busting technology? It could include refueling planes that Israel would need to carry out a strike, a series of strikes such a long distance away. And then the question is, can Israel even do it? Even if it gets, even if it has enough of the equipment, even if it needs more equipment, would it be better if the United States does it? And would Trump be willing to be part of a coalition together with Israel that does take out Iran? There's a sense that Trump does not want the United States involved directly in a war, and probably would prefer that Israel will do it. And if you remember that in the last administration, Trump was upset that Israel did not participate in the striking of IRGC General Qasem Soleimani.
Right.
So it could be that Trump turns around to Netanyahu and says, look, you want to do this? You think this is important for your security, for your existential security? Go do it. You got my backing, but I'm not doing it for you. So these are the types of things that are going to be discussed.
One last item on the agenda in the meeting that we can expect, and this I think you described as the crown jewel, is Trump, the peacemaker who would like to advance normalization. We've talked about it on the show over the course, I believe, of the last year, how the Saudi government was not willing to enter any sort of normalization with Israel under a very weak Biden administration. That is an administration of the past. Trump is now in charge. And he has made it crystal clear that he would like to add to the Abraham Accords, specifically with the Saudis, bringing them into the fold and signing some sort of deal, being a part of a deal between Israel and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So we can expect that, I would think, on Tuesday.
Yeah, Trump wants to see this done, and Netanyahu wants to see this done. As I mentioned here before, I interviewed the prime minister on the eve of the last election. And he said that there were two things that he wanted to accomplish that he had not yet accomplished in any of his previous terms. The first is to make sure that Iran never crosses the nuclear threshold, and B, to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia. We're seeing in this meeting now with Donald Trump that the plans are going to be discussed for how to do these two things. And while Trump wants a deal done, and again, Trump's the deal maker, the question is, what do the Saudis want in order to get a deal done? And can a deal get done either before Iran gets attacked? Can a deal get done before there's some closure in the other fronts in the war, particularly in Gaza? Is some deal with Israel done as part of a rebuilding plan in the Gaza Strip? These are all moving parts, all dots that connect, and it's going to be up to Netanyahu and Trump to figure out how to align the pieces on this chessboard. And I do think that that's what they're going to try to do. If you remember also during the campaign, Trump said, Israel's such a tiny country. He said, so tiny. And in fact, maybe there's some kind of way to make Israel bigger, right? And so, we're seeing now that Israel may wind up extending its sovereignty into some parts or all of Gaza. Israel may end up extending some degree of sovereignty into southern Lebanon. Israel has already extended some degree of sovereignty into a buffer zone in southern Syria. And you have Syrian Druze communities asking Israel to extend their sovereignty over those communities. And then at the same time, you have the possibility for making peace with Saudi Arabia and much of the rest of the Muslim world. And of course, like the crown jewel of all the crown jewels of sovereignty in Israel is this between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River, which is Judea and Samaria. And you'll recall in the first administration, Trump rolled out his peace to prosperity vision, calling for some kind of framework towards a state minus a Palestinian entity. And Netanyahu tried to extend Israeli sovereignty over the Jordan Valley, part of Judea and Samaria that borders with Jordan, and Trump really wouldn't allow it. And that was a major sticking point between Netanyahu and Trump. Now, it's not clear that Israel will extend its sovereignty in any of the areas that I just mentioned, but Trump did say that in the campaign. And so I think that all of these pieces, Israeli sovereignty, Israeli strength, defeating the terrorists, normalizing with the moderates. These are all things that are now on the table. And Donald Trump is in a unique position to help Netanyahu. And I actually think that the way this meeting comes out and what comes out of this meeting over the next coming weeks and months will, to a large extent, I think, determine what Netanyahu's legacy is. Is Netanyahu going to be forced out of office at some point, leaving Israel in a war that wasn't completed with an Iranian entity that's on the cusp of nuclear weapons that can threaten the very existence of the state of Israel? Or together with Trump, will Netanyahu accomplish what he stated from the beginning as his war goals, which is total victory in all of the fronts, whereby Israel is then secured for decades to come and in position now to expand the circle of peace with the Saudis and others.
Alex, there's a pile of news that we could probably talk about here, but I think we're going to leave it on that note. So much more we could discuss, but you're over there in Washington, and I know you're going to be giving us updates via jns.org throughout the week. So everyone out there, keep it logged on to jns.org for Alex Traiman, CEO of JNS, and all the updates he's going to be bringing us from the meetings between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Donald Trump. Exclusive reports from Washington, D.C. Alex, anything you want to add about what's going on over there before we sign off for this week?
Well, there's a lot of anticipation, a lot of excitement. I think that there will definitely be news that comes out of this. The announcement by Trump over the last week that Gazans are going to be able to leave the strip is a paradigm shifting announcement. And there could be other paradigm shifts that take place too. I think Israel's been waiting for paradigm shifts, and they knew they were never going to get that under the Biden administration. The Trump administration is an unknown. You look at the administration, you look at Rubio, you look at Hegseth, you look at Mike Waltz, you look at Ambassador Mike Huckabee, who, by the way, will be meeting the Prime Minister tomorrow together with Christian faith leaders here in Washington. This is a pro-Israel dream team, but there's also in the Trump administration a push from the other side that doesn't see Israel as a strong ally, that sees Israel as trying to pull the United States into wars and accusing Israel of having done that over the last several decades, which is just like another anti-Semitic push from the right side of the far right of the political spectrum here in the U.S. So that's something that has to be balanced and worked out. But I think Trump has the ability and perhaps he has the desire to create some major paradigm shifts for the state of Israel. And as they say, those who bless Israel will be blessed; those who curse Israel will be cursed. And I think that Trump, he believes that because he's so close to so many of the faith leaders here in the United States. And Trump is perhaps putting his presidency on track for some major blessings if he comes to the assistance of the state of Israel in a major way.
Let's hope for the best. And Alex, looking forward to recapping with you on next week's edition of Jerusalem Minute on JNS TV, back in our studios in Jerusalem. Have a great week and hoping for great news. Want to give a shout out to our team behind the scenes, Ryan Lifshitz, Zach Sickerman, Avia Asner, and Yuri Svirtsky. Coming to you remotely this week, Josh Hasten here, correspondent for JNS News, Alex Traiman in Washington, D.C., CEO of JNS. Have a great week, everybody. See you next week back in the eternal capital of the state of Israel and Jewish people, Jerusalem. Have a great week, everybody.